Do I even gotta tell you what time it is, or like, you already know what's about to happen, don't you? Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? In today's glaze review, we're going to be testing C-10 Snow from the AMACO Celadon line. I remember seeing a comment on one of my previous videos that like all Celadons give great you must test things over texture when you're testing a Celadon because that's the key of a true AMACO Celadon. Now, if you're not familiar with my glaze reviews or you're new to the channel, welcome by the way. This is the playlist where I take a glaze off of the shelf and test it for you on a bunch of different clay bodies and then mix it up with some other glazes, either store-bought or my own, just to see how they react. That way you know what you're getting before you actually buy the product. So today we're going to be testing C-10 Snow on some brown clay bodies. This is Redstone from Aardvark. It is one of my favorite brown clay bodies. This is B-Mix with Grog, these two here, and we're testing it on these two because I usually have a white baseline for how the color turns out. The high majority of these test styles in the bottle right here are usually a porcelain or white clay body test style, which means that I want to see how it looks on a brown clay body, because brown clay bodies, or red clay bodies, usually have iron in them, a tad bit more than the white one at least, and sometimes just that little bit of iron will change the glaze drastically. We're also going to be testing it on this cup right here for the previously named reason of just having a bunch of texture. Let it be known, also, that Celadons usually have a really good texture melt over a lot of other textures. That is a common thing with Celadons, but to go as far as to say that all of them do that, I don't know about that. Even if you compare it to just the picture on the bottle, it's like, oh look, this glaze breaks over texture, while this one, not so much. So we're going to see how well this does as an actual Celadon today in our test, and we're also going to be mixing it with a couple other glazes. I'm probably going to be doing these two as a baseline test and mixing them with some Oil Spot Red, which is a handmade glaze. We're going to use this as a true baseline test, just the glaze by itself, and these are going to be a little bit artistic. I'm going to see what I can do with these. Maybe I'll just glaze the insides of these lines and call it a day. Oh wait, I forgot to do a thing. If I don't do the thing, I might get hateful comments down below. Glaze review! This is actually something I wanted to do quite some time ago when I made the intermediate video about lines. I wanted to show you potters how to use lines in your glaze work, but I felt like the video went a little bit too long when I did it. But today, I think we have time to talk about it and for me to just show you what it means whenever I talk about planning out your glazes by using lines. The two bowls that I showed you earlier have a line in the lip of them, and they also have a line right here on the body. I'm just going to put the glaze inside these lines and clean it up a little bit, but of course, I'm going to use a glaze syringe just to make sure it gets in there nice and tight.
Boy.
This is a technique that I wanted to show you to go along with that previous episode I had done in the intermediate section, talking about lines in your work and what they could do for your work on an artistic level. But I also didn't have a lot of time to explain that to you in the video itself, and I didn't want to just glaze over it. Yes, I got you. That was such a good setup. I'm sorry. Don't unsubscribe. No, but on a serious note, I do think this is actually artistic, and I am going to test the glaze like this. Okay, just for the sake of my notes and your notes, we're going to go over this one more time. These two over here are C-10 Celadon Snow, but with my red oil spot on top of it. This was a glaze that I got from Glaze, although it is a handmade glaze. Someone else developed this glaze itself. I love it. It's one of my favorites. These two here are just C-10, but they're kind of artistically put on brown or red clay. This is Redstone from Aardvark. I love this clay body, but I did two of them, as I usually do, just in case they come out really good. Like, I'll be really sad if like one of these comes out really good and I didn't make a second one to make a set to sell on my website, you know, like I'll be kind of messed. So I made a double of this as well. This is going to be the test style for our red clay body. This one here is the one that I'm most interested in because C-10 doesn't really look like it has any texture potential, even though historically speaking, Celadons usually run fantastic over texture and they allow you to see through the clay body a lot of the times. But this just seems super opaque and super white to me. So if this comes out super white and opaque and it doesn't really let you see through the texture too much, or it doesn't change colors over the texture, we're gonna know that it's just white. It's literally just white, which some people look for. Don't get me wrong, some people just want like plain white with no clear or whatever, but you know, I won't be talking to those people though. Before we put these in the kiln, I just want you to know that I really badly wanted to mix this one with Lao Guy Green, which is my own glaze that I make. But I love you so much that I decided to resist. You know how difficult it is to not test a glaze combination just for the sake of content? Okay, now that everything's out of the kiln, let's take a look at what we got. This one here is hilarious and also kind of sad at the same time. While I was glazing this, I had an off feeling and I didn't know why. It turns out I completely forgot to glaze the inside of the bowl, but I did still put the glaze on the very edge instead of like an inlay technique and on the very side of it. So now it's essentially just an incense bowl, but I 100% forgot to glaze the inside. You ever seen an unglazed bowl? Yeah, it's disgusting, isn't it? Look at it. Look at it. Take it in. So these two bowls here are essentially just C-10 that I put inside of the lines of the bowls with a little applicator tool, and it came out pretty good. You know, the one thing I will say about this glaze is that the glaze does not move very much or at all. It stayed exactly where I thought it would. It went inside the lines. Sometimes I test this type of thing out with other glazes, and if I put too much glaze in here, it just ends up dripping out of the line itself. Granted, it's a difficult line to get out of, but it's still, like, this is a fairly stable glaze. But it's what I come to expect from AMACO glazes. Also keep in mind that these two are on brown clay, so when we look at the white clay test style, just look at the difference in between the white and brown clay and how the glaze affects that. Brown or red clay usually has a little bit more iron in it than whiter clays do, especially that of porcelain. So sometimes if you mix a little bit of iron with that glaze, let's say you're making the glaze yourself, it turns a bit of a different color, especially when it has like rutile in it. This glaze here didn't change color at all, I will tell you that right now. Actually, you know what? Let's just look at the white clay test style so I can show you. Here's a good example. I recently tested a glaze called Lynette's Purple. This is it on white clay and this is it on brown clay. You can see the difference because there's a tiny bit more iron inside of this clay here in the glaze itself. One turns a little tiny bit darker, and I have to keep these in my notes to show myself like, oh, okay, if I put it on brown clay, it turns out like this, but on white clay, it turns out a little bit more like this. This glaze here, when I put it on the white clay test style, did none of that. It's literally the same exact color. The only real difference is that when you get close to the edges of the brown clay body, it ends up showing a tiny bit of this like weird grayish brown, but that's it. I think that's just the normality of glaze. It has nothing to do with the glaze itself. It's just how glaze be working dough. I will also say that this white clay test style was kind of a massive disappointment, if I'm being real with you. And just before we look at this specific test style, I'm gonna take like a minute or so to be 100,000 Island dressing real with you, okay? a lot of companies realize that you've probably had experience or at least have seen Celadons before, and most Celadons melt over texture and end up changing depth whenever you put them over texture, as they're very translucent. You see through them very easily, they change very easily over texture, the depth changes whenever you put texture, they usually change in like opacity if you put them on a little bit thicker or thinner on a certain place. But they still, knowing this, name this glaze Celadon. They realize that it sells better if they call it Celadon because you have prior experience with it. Keep in mind that just because something is named Celadon, much like this test style on white over here, does not mean that it has to have texture, does not mean that it has to be a certain amount of translucency, does not mean that you need to see through it, does not mean that it will mix or change different opacities. This is a very common misconception in the clay world, and companies that make glazes understand that you're just correlating the word Celadon with those previous experiences. So you see this and you're like, oh, it's going to do all those things that I'm used to, right? Like it's gonna melt over certain stuff and change opacity and have depth and texture. No, that is untrue. C-10 does not do that whatsoever. It is just pure white. That is all it is. Even when you get a little bit of a close-up, it really is just white, even over texture. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now. I just feel like I should tell you that. Also, I saw a comment, I want to say like a month ago, that I remember very specifically when somebody was like, you need texture to test a Celadon glaze. It's not a real test if you don't put texture on it. Oh yeah? Huh? What are you talking about now? Huh? Yeah? Where's your God now? But keep in mind, it's white on the brown, and it's white on the white. It doesn't change texture, it doesn't change opacity or transparency. It doesn't change any of that stuff. It also doesn't change when you multi-layer it. I layered a little bit more on the inside of this mug than the outside, and it's still just pure white. I'm telling you this because the last two test styles that we had, where we mixed them with oil spot red, is very important. I saw a couple of comments of people asking me to test it because it makes great oil spots when you mix it with other AMACO glazes. So what I did is I decided to get two white clay bodies and put this C-10 snow on them, and then put an actual oil spot glaze over them. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's a glaze that I've given to you before on the channel. It is called Oil Spot Red. It's made by another person. I got it off Glaze. I will put their link to their profile down below if you want to remake the glaze. But I did put an actual glaze that makes oil spots by itself. It doesn't need another glaze to make oil spots. This is what it looks like. It literally is just oil spot by itself, no other glazes. And this is what happened to it. I know, I didn't follow your suggestion. Your suggestion was to mix it with other AMACO glazes to make oil spots. But I've done that so many times. I figured out that happens when I was like 19. I've done it so many times I was bored of it. So I was like, what happens when I mix an actual oil spot glaze with this glaze? Will it mute like everything else it did? Or will it make super oil spots? And it muted it. It for sure muted it. But here's the thing, right? It's a good glaze. If it was just called like straight white, it would be, well, probably Twitter would have a field day. Probably shouldn't call it that. If it was just called like pure snow or just like regular snow, then I'd be cool with it. It would be fine. But instead, it's called Celadon Snow. It's even named in the C series, C-10. And because of that, the brain who has experience with Celadons immediately assumes that it has characteristics and does a lot of the things that other Celadons on the market, especially from the AMACO company, does. But it doesn't do that. It literally just makes the color white. And then it literally, on brown clay, just makes the color white. And even when you mix it with other glazes that already have oil spots in them, it turns them and mutes them. And also makes white. I might be uneducated. There might be some historian down below who's like, actually, a Celadon is characterized by... I'm just letting you know that most people do not characterize any of the things that happened in any of these tests. I'm going to give this glaze a Dirty Potter 3 out of 5 because it does exactly what it says it does on the bottle. The test style is absolutely correct. It's not like it lied to you. I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, that the test style is really true to form. But this is not a Celadon to me. I feel like this should be put in like the Potter's Choice edition or something, because I don't understand why this would be categorized as a Celadon based on other people's experiences, even mine, with what you would call a Celadon. It's literally none of the things that have attributes of a Celadon. So that's about it for my review. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. Before I get going, I want to give a shout out to these two people who actually commented on the channel and asked for glazes to be reviewed. If you put comments down below and ask for certain glazes to be reviewed, I see them. I don't respond to all of them. Within 2 days of me usually posting a video, I go through the comments, and then after that, I kind of leave the video alone. So if you want me to see a comment, or you want me to test a certain glaze, I just comment like as soon as the video is posted, and I usually see it. But thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. Hopefully your next kiln load comes out fantastic. Have a great day. Remember to stretch and hydrate. That's a problem recently. And I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week.
Thank you for your patronage.